Welcome to the Lightbulb Moment podcast. You are listening to episode 11, Designing for the Virtual Classroom, part 2. I'm your host, Mike, and I'm joined by virtual classroom expert, Joe. In this episode, we explain the details of Joe's facilitator guide. Joe tells us why more slides is better and how to design for your platform. So, Joe, in our last podcast, you completely destroyed all of the plans I had laid out for our following series, and we're now doing Designing for the Virtual Classroom Part 2. So, in our last episode, Part 1, we looked at the differences between virtual classrooms and face-to-face design, in making sure you have interaction every 5 minutes in a session, the business needs, learning goals. That's the recap from last one. So in this one, let's try and focus on actually what you do at the start of, you're designing for a new session. Where do you start? What do you start with?
Brilliant. So like you say, all of those goals are set. You've spoken to your subject matter experts, you've gathered your materials, all that good stuff. Where I start with this is I draft out what the session is going to be in the facilitator guide, rather than on PowerPoint. You could use Post-it notes to move things around. There's all sorts of varieties of ways you can do things. I do that in the facilitator guide. And
the facilitator guide, for those of you who don't know, it is shared on our website. If you go to lightbulbmoment.info and then just do a search for facilitator guide, you can get access to it. It's absolutely free. And basically, it's a Word document with tables in it. And the first part of the table has got the slide. And Joe always puts a little mini thumbnail picture of what the slide actually is. The next bit is then the facilitator, so what the facilitator will be saying or delivering or asking questions. There's a producer section, which I have to diligently follow or ignore. And then there's a technical and interaction notes bit, which is really interesting. I'll get you to explain how you've done that technical side bit in a second, Joe. The time on the slide and then the total elapsed time, which is totaled up as you go through. So explain to us, why do you use the facilitator guide? Why have you laid it out this way?
So this is based on, how many years have I been in learning and development? Let's say 20 for the sake of argument. And it's based on all the learning and lesson plans I did way back when, because you need something to know what's going on. And as anybody has ever picked up a lesson or a session from another facilitator or teacher and not had enough notes and gone, I'm not really sure what to do, then they will know how important it is. This one I've designed specifically for the virtual classroom or webinar. It's landscape on a page, and it's got the information in it that I feel I need to be on time, on topic, the right engagement and the right questions.
And we use this for pretty much every single webinar, virtual classroom session. I mean, you use it when you go to conferences now, when you're actually speaking at conferences. And I find it really helpful because I can keep track of exactly where we're at. I know what's coming up. I know what my role is. I know what your role is. And then the few times that we have had technical issues, I've managed to jump in and I know where we're at and what you were planning to do next. And so you use this as you go through these sessions. Why is having the elapsed time so important? Why is having that technical notes and interaction and how you actually design the iconography with that? Why is that important?
Ooh, iconography, Mike.
I'm throwing out the big words today, Jim.
So let's handle the timing part first, because this comes into part of your design and how it's slightly different in a virtual classroom or webinar. So one column is time on slide, and I take that down to 30 seconds. That's my smallest unit of time.
I will
It could be 1 minute.
I would also like to say that she nearly always ignores the time on slide. And I'm normally the one viciously typing away, move on. But anyway, carry on.
Well, because what I will come to later, Mike, is how important it is to be flexible with your timing. So I have it down to the 30 seconds. Could be 1 minute, 2 minutes, could be 10 minutes, depending on what you're doing.
I
And
just want to interrupt actually because
I'll get a whole sentence out here at some point.
you won't, because I actually have the free facilitator guide open on my screen at the moment. So this is if you actually follow that link and listen to what I said at the start and download the facilitator guide, your first example has got 10 seconds. So it's down to the 10 seconds.
Oh, I used to do 10 seconds. I don't now. Okay. Partly because I struggle to add up, as anybody will know. But also 10 seconds, it's just too short a time. Even for me, that was just silly. And by having the 30 seconds there, even I think one of the examples is it's one sentence saying, so now we're going to do topic X. That gives you a buffer. If on a section where it was 1 minute or 2 minutes, you've gone over and you've only done 10 seconds on an introductory slide, it gives you a bit of a buffer, which is really nice. So I obviously need to update what's on.
Yeah, I'm writing down on a Post-it note now, Joe, to update free facilitator guide that we're plugging in this podcast.
Well, it's all about the evolution of design, Michael. So the timing is really important. And often people kind of go, really, 30 seconds, 1 minute, whereas in a face-to-face session, we might, not be used to having slides, and perhaps that's another topic, but also we might not be used to planning 30 seconds or a minute per slide. But the reason I do this is for me, for Mike, for anybody else who picks up the training that I design, for them to deliver it, it gives them an expectation. So if there's a question on the slide, or if there's a note of what to say, may not be a script, there's levels of detail in how much you put there. But I know if it's a 1 minute slide with something written on it and a question, that's really quick. Whereas if it's a 5 minute slide with one sentence and a question, I know I'm expecting a lot more conversation. So it really helps manage that.
And then when you've actually got the thumbnail of the slide there, I guess that just gives both of us a visual reference of where we're at, what you're getting to, where things are going.
Yeah, and also what's coming next, which is really nice. So by having the visual there, so I used to work on a course, and for one reason or another, the course got updated fairly regularly, not always for good reasons, unfortunately. And the facilitator guide at 30 pages or whatever would have the slide numbers written on it. So I found I was just going through, deleting slide 33 and putting in 35, deleting 34, putting in 36, and just doing that again and again and again. And I thought, this is madness. So if you change a slide or add in a slide, you're adding in a row in a table, or you delete one picture and put a new one in. But also, Mike, there's another reason for it, and that's to do with cognitive processing. So you know when you're producing about how much you have to read in that guide and how difficult it is, don't you?
Yeah, and especially when I'm producing, I'm chatting away with people in the text box. I might have people trying to email me with, I'm trying to get in, or the link isn't working. You know, I'm doing a lot of different things whilst also trying to produce the session. And we might have our back channel as well, where we're discussing what we're going to do or changes to the session.
And just explain back channel very briefly.
Okay, so we use Adobe Connect, although you can use, you could use Skype in the background of other platforms, but we specifically use Adobe Connect mainly for the main reason we use it is because it has a presenter only area, and we'll cover this in another podcast, but basically we have a little secret area where we can chat to each other, we can move different pods around, and we can drag and drop, say, different PDF files or videos from that presenter only area to the actual main viewing area that the attendees can see.
So like you say, you could use Skype, you could even use text message if you wanted to. It's just a way to communicate, not in that main chat window in front of everybody.
I mean, it's a little bit more advanced than that. I'm going off on a tangent at this time.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop you going off on a tangent for once, Mike.
I just wanted to explain, for in Adobe Connect, it's like you're both on the same Windows desktop, so that then you can move things around. But anyway, carry on.
Yeah. There we go. Oh, the tables have turned. So you know how difficult it is to read all this information. So one of the things with our brains is the way our brains process language, which could be written or spoken or listened to, and pictures or images, it's in different parts of the brain. So what we can do, even if we're reading or listening or speaking, I can look at the image and I can process that even though the language part of my brain is talking or reading. So it's a really, really great way to have information on there. So I'm not reading slide 33 and slowing down in my speaking or getting confused. I'm just seeing a picture. I process it so much quicker.
So just to be clear, in this table, one of the columns is technical and interaction notes. And what Joe often puts in there is a little screen grab, a little picture of, say, chat with, like you would see on your phone on Messenger or whatever it is, little chat
speech
box.
Bubble kind of icon,
exactly.
Isn't it?
Or it might just have the raise hand icon from whatever specific software that facilitator guide is for, Adobe or Cisco WebEx. So this is what you're saying, that you can scan over there. You're not reading, ask this question in chat. You literally just see the icon of chat, and you know that you can carry on reading your normal facilitator bit of what you're going through. And you haven't given yourself that cognitive overload that you then need to read two things at the same time. This is what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'll do is in the facilitator column, so in my column, it will have, could be a script, could just be notes about talk about X and Y and Z. It's up to you how much detail you put in there. So it could be looking at the example picture on our blog. The very first one, it's explaining the chat window. So the text is, we are using the chat panel a lot. So that's what I would say. And then in red, it says, you've seen our agenda. What is the thing you want from today's session? Now, in that text, it doesn't say type in the chat window or panel or box or whatever terminology you want to use. But in that interaction column, it's got a picture of the chat window. So like you say, it's just a really tiny icon. And what that allows me to do is just look at that super, super quickly. And I know now it's a chat thing. So I can just say, type your answer in chat. I don't need the script element of it there. And that goes for hand up, green tick, red X, text tool, annotation tools. Most of them, I've got a little icon for.
And so when it comes to cognitive load, slides. Now, I want to try and keep you, because we could probably do a whole...
one of my favourite topics in the world is design.
Trust me, I've been on enough
slides.
free webinars with Joe where it's literally just on Skype or on our back channel. It's just been a torrent of abuse over the slides on webinars.
That's not true. I fully respect everybody's design rights.
White slide, grey texts. Yeah. But anyway, so in a nutshell, I'm going to limit you to a couple of minutes. Slide design is, I think in a previous podcast I went over, is less is more or more is less or average is average. Go through what do you think best practice, or how do you do your slide design?
Okay, so once I've got my draft in my facilitator guide and I've got my icons in for my interactions, and I've got a nice variety of, this is chat, this is hands up, this is on microphone, this is whiteboard, and I've sort of decided what those activities are going to be, it's only then that I get to start making the slides. That comes much later in the process, because otherwise it can get in the way of the actual contents and the activities. So at this point, we've got to think about the structure of our program. And again, maybe that's another topic about how you open, how you start, how you build up through your activities. But if you're a trainer, you'll know what a great start to a session is. So there's a few differences online, but it's doing that. With the slides, I use them. And so there's, we've heard people before, Mike, who've said they don't use slides, or we've had some clients come back horrified at the work that I've done, just generally, and kind of gone, you've turned our 60 slide deck into a 90 slide deck. We don't have enough time for that. The time hasn't changed. We've had that quite a few times, haven't we?
Yeah. And I think this is probably what you're just about to go into. And that is the fact that it's adjusting. You can have more slides, but it's actually making it so they're focused on what they're doing. And you might go through a slide quicker or shorter, or whatever it is. Whereas a lot of people still have in their mind that each slide is going to have 10 bullet points, and so each slide is 5 minutes, and that's just not going to work out.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. So I do use slides, and I'm an advocate for not using slides or PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever it is if they're not necessary. It's only if they're necessary. But in the webinar and virtual classroom, I think they are, because what you can't see is me as a facilitator at the front of the class, which is usually how it works. And also when other people are talking or doing stuff, you can't swivel around in your chair and look at other people. Therefore, having the slides, it's a great visual attention grabber and communication tool. So absolutely use slides. And you know what? More slides is better. I'm going to put it out there. I know I'm going to get loads of arguments and people won't like
Controversial.
it. But I think, I think more is better.
Well, I think it's one of those things that you often use. You've got quite a few slides, and often they are really visually striking, but they will often have sometimes just one short sentence, one little point on there. And, we've been on some webinars where I can't remember what webinar it was, but it doesn't matter. We were on a webinar and basically there was engagement. This person was getting discussion in the chat box and they had a questions and answers panel and there was loads of stuff going on. But because of that, they then stayed on the same boring slide. It was basically a plain white slide with like 4 bullet points on it for about 11 minutes. And I was sitting there because, as you say, I can't turn around and look at somebody else who's effectively, would have been asking or would have been talking. Instead, I have a focus point and it is my screen. And if that is a boring focus point, I'm going to start drifting.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I recommend is one learning point per slide. So that's why some of my slides are just an image, maybe one word, maybe a few sentences or a quote. But it's to move through those to try and make it visually interesting, but not kind of a complete flash of too many different things. But it keeps that visual interest moving forward. And I think that's really important. And maybe we'll go to town another day, all about slide design.
Right, you're not destroying my podcast structure. And we're not you're not.
All right. Another day, not the next podcast. I'll concede to that.
Okay, so when it comes to the platform that you're using, is this going to have an impact on the design of your session?
Yes, absolutely. So actually we probably should have said this right at the beginning, because whatever your platform is will make an impact. So you probably wouldn't use GoToWebinar as a virtual classroom platform. But as a good example, GoToWebinar doesn't have a chat. It has a question box and it has chat between the panelists, but not an open chat. Hopefully, you wouldn't be using that for a virtual classroom. But as we've said in, I think, Foundation episode 3, the tool you have already is the best one that you've got. So knowing what your tool can or can't do is imperative to how you design, because with no chat box, well, we can't use chat. So if we've got a polling feature, but we can only ask one question at a time, or we're limited to the type of question or the number of options that we have, that makes a difference as to how you design your activities.
So I guess this is the equivalent of, we've started off, we've broken down what are the learning needs of the session or of the company or what the organization, what do the attendees need to know when they leave the session. And then this platform bit is almost like saying, well, you're in class 1B and that doesn't have a projector, so don't use a projector. Yeah. But it does have all of this other stuff, so you could use that other stuff. It's the same equivalent.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's knowing, part of it then is knowing the nuance of how it works. So, I can't even remember what platform it was. Maybe it was the Zoom platform we were using with a group. And we wanted them to go into breakout rooms. Great. They designed or they made some notes on whiteboards. Great. But I had to make sure I built into that session time and instructions for them to save their whiteboard and then for me to get them to share their screen so they could open up the whiteboard. Whereas in Adobe Connect, I've got omnipotent control. In WebEx, I can just ask them within the system. It's really easy. With Saba, I can't even remember how it works in Saba, sorry. So it's about knowing that nuance, because that has to be in the technical notes. And that will affect how much your facilitator or your producer or both need to know. And therefore, if you've got facilitators that maybe aren't quite so comfortable, or you don't have a producer, you might say, you know what, breakouts are a bit too much for us right now. We're going to design the activities differently and come back to breakouts in a few months.
Yeah, I actually remember that session, and I was going through the facilitator guide and was just like, what on earth is all this? Because I don't think I'd used Zoom at that point.
No, you hadn't. No.
And I was just like, we're doing a breakout room. I was like, why is all these extra steps involved? But it's, as you say, you need to know what you've got there. So I guess breaking this back down to the structure, because otherwise we're going to end up with designing for a virtual classroom part 3 if we don't.
Well, there's a lot to cover, Mike.
Yeah, if we don't focus more on this. But so you've got your design plan, your intervention, what you're doing at the start. You've worked out your platform. You're starting to build it in the facilitator guide. Give us an idea of maybe the first 10 minutes of a virtual classroom.
Yeah, so it is breaking it down. So once you've got everybody connected, everything's ready to go, you're at literally slide 1 of your actual session. I would say the general structure you want to go through is your opening slide, which gives you your session title, maybe company name, whatever it is. And that's literally your front cover. Welcome, we're doing this. After that, probably you want to introduce yourself, so have a picture of yourself on the slide. I know lots of people hate that, me included, but people like to know who you are. So just a picture of you and literally 30 seconds of who you are and what you do. That's all I do, just so people have a sense. The next slide I would look into is going straight into describing what the online tools are so that we can practice with them. The absolute first tool I always focus on is the tick cross if you have it, because that's the quickest, simplest, easiest way for people to get in contact with you or to confirm they can hear you, for instance. So it's have a slide, explain that, get everybody to tick cross, maybe hand up. After that, it depends on the session. Sometimes I go into the agenda and say, this is what we're covering today. Green tick if you're happy, because it really reinforces that quickly. And then I explain the chat window. Again, it's only a minute or so. And then ask people, well, what do you want out of today's session? You've seen the agenda, we're getting going. From there, it's then about what's going on in your session.
I just want to jump in for a second. So this is all right from the start, and the whole point of doing all of this is that you're showing the attendees there's going to be engagement, they are involved, and they're going to be involved right from the start. You might have just been about to go there, but I've gone there first, so
Yeah, you're right. So that whole bit that I just said there, that would be 6 minutes, maybe 7 minutes, but that's really good groundwork. And right from the very beginning, within a couple of minutes, you're at the agenda. Within another couple of minutes, people are telling you just the absolute basics of, I want tips, or I need to know how to do X in depth. They're getting that right away. And then after that, it's about building a really good session, introducing it, having a little bit of delivery, explaining what the activity is. It could be explaining a new tool like the whiteboard, and then practicing that tool really briefly. Again, only a couple of minutes, and then do your activity and just building up from there.
Okay, and in 30 seconds, so once you've then gone past that point, would you be trying to go, right, this is some information I need to go over, a discussion point, this is some more information in an engagement activity, this is some more information, maybe just a green tick. You'd go through that kind of process generally.
Generally, in 30 seconds,
okay.
Yes.
Your answer is, in our next podcast, Designing for a Virtual Classroom Part 3, no, but we will do...
Part 78.
But okay, so that's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Jo. I think you were right. I'm glad we did Part 2 of this. I think we probably do need to do a Part 3 or an advanced podcast on design.
And I've got it on record that you said I was right at last.
This is where I delete that in editing. But But anyway, so our next podcast, we are looking at hardware setup when it comes to virtual classrooms. Joe is often asked, what do you use? Do you use a laptop? Do you have monitors? Do you print this off? Do you have a wired connection? Do you use wireless? So we're going to go over all of those different things, all of the tech side of it. And that is what is coming up in our next podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Joe, for the discussion today.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for listening. We really hope you enjoyed it and look forward to your feedback and your comments. If you like the podcast, please remember to subscribe and to share. You can follow Mike on Twitter @MikeLightBulb. You can follow me on Twitter @LightBulbJoe, and for other updates @MomentLightBulb. You can also find our podcasts on YouTube, along with more great content. If you're in need of virtual classroom training, check out lightbulbmoment.online. For our blogs, lightbulbmoment.info. And remember our free community for questions and resources, lightbulbmoment.community.